day. So once again, we will be discussing keeping your financial aid. And then here are some of the objectives we will be going over. So to start, we will be going over renewing the FAFSA and what those steps and timelines look like. We will discuss our Satisfactory Academic Progress policy. We will go over financial aid and those amounts from year to year and how they may or may not change. And then also additional scholarship opportunities that continuing students have at Pacific. As always, if questions come up, please go ahead and type those in the Q&A box there. Hopefully we should have plenty of time to address almost all of them live. Otherwise, we certainly can try to get back to you in the meantime. But yes, if you could go ahead and type those in, we'll be able to have plenty of time for that Q&A at the end. So to start, I always advise students you will want to make sure that you resubmit your FAFSA every year. It is not just a one-time application for 4 years worth of financial aid. For a student enrolled as an undergraduate in an undergraduate program for 4 years, you will be doing very likely 4 years worth of FAFSAs. So for a student's second year in college, the FAFSA goes online every academic year on October 1st. So for the 21-22 school year, that FAFSA goes online on October 1st of 2020. And there are two main ways that you can complete it. I've got a little screenshot of what the My Student Aid mobile app looks like. So you can download the mobile app there. Or otherwise, you can always log in online at the studentaid.gov website to complete the FAFSA on a desktop or a laptop as well, or even in a browser on a tablet. As always, our office is available to assist students and families if they've got any questions about filing the FAFSA along the way, or if they run into any difficulty getting logged in. We certainly do our best to troubleshoot the best we can. Sometimes we do have to refer students to the studentaid.gov helpline to try to get logged in if perhaps they've been locked out or something. But you use your FSA ID and password to log in, and then you use that same ID and password to sign the FAFSA at the end. I know occasionally there can be issues because sometimes you use it only once a year to sign the FAFSA. If that's the case, we can point you toward resources if you're having trouble with that. If you have any type of financial aid that has the word grant or loan in it, that you plan on accepting or attempting to qualify for, you do need to renew the FAFSA. Now, if you only have merit scholarships or you were awarded student loans this year that you don't plan on taking at all in the future, merit scholarships are not dependent on the FAFSA. I advise students to do it every year, but certainly you're not required to if you're only anticipating renewing your merit scholarships for each year. So here is a little screenshot of the typical financial aid process. Step number 1 will be to gather any applicable tax documents, bank statements, all the information that the FAFSA will ask you for. Step number 2 will be to complete the FAFSA in October. The reason that you're able to do it so early for the student's second year in college is because the FAFSA asks for income from 2 years prior. So the FAFSA that's going online this upcoming October will ask for your 2019 tax information. So the taxes that you very recently have filed or will be filing here pretty soon. You'll want to make sure you reviewed your student aid report after you have filed the FAFSA and make any corrections if necessary. Take a look at it, make sure there's no extra zeros typed in anywhere. From that point, typically our office works on awarding brand new first year and transfer students early on, typically in the February to March month. And then from there, we work on our continuing student awards. So continuing students do get their awards a little bit later than what brand new first year students got or what you have already received for this academic year. We work on getting those awards out typically during the months of May and June. Part of that process includes reviewing students' grades, and along with that, getting the awards out for our brand new first year students takes some time at the beginning. Another thing to note as well is continuing students no longer receive the paper award letter. So very likely you may have gotten a copy of that award letter by mail. Moving on, we try to save some resources there, and we will only be sending out the digital award letter if you are a FAFSA filer. So parents and students, make sure, one, your students are certainly checking their email over the summer, and two, if you are interested in reviewing that financial aid award, that your student communicates with you when they get that award notice so you can review everything together. Obviously, when you get that award notification in May or June, take some time to look at it, accept any additional aid that you are planning for the second year at Pacific, and then that cycle starts over. That next October, you'll be filing the FAFSA each year. So to start, one of the simplest objectives to keep financial aid each year that we always try our best to explain to students is make sure you're going to class and trying to keep your GPA up as high as you possibly can. Not only for additional aid opportunities, but to meet our general satisfactory academic progress policy, often abbreviated as SAP. So to maintain financial aid from year to year, students need to have a minimum cumulative GPA of a 2.0, and then they do need to complete a minimum of 67% of all of the courses they attempt. And I'll go into this a little bit more moving forward. It's important not only for your financial aid, but also in the perspective of graduating on time, staying on track with your academic plan, and perhaps, maybe even wrapping everything up early, or keeping students from having to take an extra semester or maybe even an extra year with that educational plan and potentially owing more along the way. So diving into our Satisfactory Academic Progress policy in a little bit more detail, we do review at the end of each academic year. So what this means, if students get to school and they have a little bit of a rough fall semester, they do have the entire spring semester to try to get their GPA and their course completion rate up a little bit. So like I said, it is a cumulative 2.0 GPA, so we take into account all of the academic work on the student's account. And then the 67% unit requirement. This is also known as PACE. What this means is that at the end of each add drop period, we look at all of the units the student attempts versus the units they successfully complete. So the add drop period, to elaborate more on this a little bit, very typically at the start of semesters, schools know that students are maybe on wait lists for classes, or they are working on getting into all the classes they need. So there's usually about a 2-week time period in which they can just add and drop courses, at will. After that time period, any of the courses that the student is registered in, those are the courses that we then look to see how many units did they pass. Did they drop any of those units after that point? We take a look at that, and that goes into that unit percentage. I'll show an illustration of that in a moment. This policy applies to almost all sources of aid. So not only federal and state and institutional grants, but also almost all of our general merit scholarships. So our merit scholarship renewal policy does match the SAP policy, so a 2.0 at the end of each year, and completing 67% of all of the courses. There are a few exceptions to this policy. So for example, our Powell Scholarship recipients do have a higher GPA average. There are a handful of other endowed donor scholarships that students may receive in the future throughout the years that have higher GPA requirements for renewal. But generally, a majority of our aid does fall along the lines of the 2.0 and the 67% PACE requirement. So here's an example of what I'm talking about when I allude to this PACE requirement. So let's say we've got a student that begins in fall of 2020. They enroll in 15 units to start. But after the add drop period, they are in a 5-unit chemistry course, and they are just realizing that perhaps they're not doing as well as they would have liked, and they maybe plan on retaking it later, or they end up determining they don't need it for their degree requirements, and they drop that 5-unit course. Like I said, after the add drop period. So at the end of this semester, the student successfully has passed the other 10 units they stayed enrolled in, but they did drop the 5-unit chemistry course. So if we do a little bit of division, 10 units out of 15 units gives a 66% PACE calculation, which is lower than the 67% requirement. Unfortunately, we can't do any rounding up in these instances. But no need to fear, the student still has the spring semester to try to bring that PACE requirement up. So in this case, the student enrolls in 13 units for the spring semester, and they successfully pass all 13 of those units. So we take the 10 out of 15 that they passed in the fall, we add that to the 13 out of 13 that they passed in the spring, and then that gives 23 out of 28 units passed over what was attempted at the end of the academic year. That brings the student's PACE percentage up to 82%, which is well above the 67% requirement that the student has to be at the end of the academic year. What I always tell students, because they often come in and ask, hey, I need to drop this course, I'm just not doing very well, I don't want it shown up on my transcript perhaps, how is that going to impact financial aid, not only now, but in the future? For units that are dropped after the add drop period, very typically that student is charged a penalty for those courses, meaning that there's a portion of the course they're still gonna have to pay for anyway. So we don't go through and make any revisions to their financial aid award in the moment, but we always advise, hey, in the future, this could negatively impact your PACE percentage. So we tell students it's fine to drop a class here or there. We certainly know it happens, but not to make a habit of it, because that can reduce that PACE percentage overall below the 67%. There are options if a student does not maintain the SAP policy at the end of the academic year. Certainly, we know and understand that there are things that come up in students' lives that can cause them to perhaps struggle with the courses that they're taking. So there is the opportunity for the student to appeal to have their financial aid renewed if they weren't meeting the SAP requirements. Please keep in mind that the student does need to demonstrate that there was some sort of extenuating circumstance. I've had students in the past that have just maybe gotten caught up with the partying lifestyle in college a bit too much. And that was part of their appeal, but unfortunately, that would not be an extenuating circumstance we can take into consideration. Certainly there are medical and mental health concerns that may come up from year to year. There could be some sort of drastic circumstance that happened within the student's family that is causing them difficulties and kind of trouble coping with that, along with trying to keep up with their studies. There are just a wide variety of things that certainly can happen. So I don't necessarily have an extensive list to go over, but if there was something that was out of the student's control that did cause them to not meet those requirements or do as well as they had hoped in their courses, they certainly can appeal. We have an online appeal process. There's third-party documentation that would have to be obtained and submitted along with an academic plan from an advisor, but we certainly do our best to walk students through all those steps and everything they need to go through and submit for our committee to review. If the appeal is approved, the student is placed on a temporary academic probation, and then they do need to meet those SAP requirements again at the end of the upcoming semester, according with everything they have listed on their academic plan. If there are any changes to that academic plan or any deviations, the student needs to notify us, and they potentially need to reappeal for a new academic plan to be considered. But we can cross that bridge with the student when we get to that point. So moving on from the SAP requirements, I want to briefly touch on the opportunity to apply for additional scholarships as students continue through their academic career at Pacific. I know this is something that has been brought up in past webinars and it's on our website, but I just want to touch on it in case we've got any new folks joining us today. So beginning in the spring semester of all of our students' first year at Pacific, they may be invited by our office to create an account and apply for our additional endowed scholarships. These are donor-funded scholarships that are provided oftentimes by generous organizations and Pacific alums to reward hardworking Tigers at Pacific. So with that being said, these scholarships are certainly very competitive, so they do require a minimum 3.0 GPA to apply, to be invited to apply, and also to be considered. So this is my pitch to have your student get to Pacific and start working certainly as hard as they can so they can be invited to apply for these various opportunities. We have an online scholarship portal that we refer to as our Tiger Scholarships portal. The web address is pacific.academicworks.com. If you're ever curious about checking out those additional opportunities that your student may be able to apply to in the future, the general application does involve a short essay that the student will need to write. But it's not too extensive of a process from there, just depending on all of the additional scholarships that may fit their academic profile. From there, over the summer, we have a wide range of committees and folks that go through and review all of the applications. And it is always our goal to have those announcements made prior to the start of students' second year in college in the fall semester. So we do our best to try to notify students of which funds that they were awarded, and we definitely do that by email over the summer. This is just a screenshot of the heading of the Tiger Scholarships portal. The student signs in or creates an account if they have not logged in before using their Inside Pacific login credentials. Typically, the time frame that this portal is open is we send the email out usually middle of January or so in the spring semester, and students have till the middle of March or so to go through and finalize their application and apply for any opportunities that may fit their academic profile. All of the scholarships certainly vary. All of the donors have interests that are near and dear to their hearts. Perhaps they're looking for a female student in the School of Engineering. That's one of our scholarships we have available that I always give an example of. So they're always very specific, and then we do our best to award as many of those funds as we can and fit students to the opportunities that the donor has specified. All right, moving on to financial aid from year to year. So for a majority of our students, financial aid amounts look very similar from year to year. Obviously, there's some caveats and things that may come up, and I'll go into that in a little bit. But I advise students that if your family income remains steady from year to year and there's no major fluctuations, you can expect a very similar financial aid award value. So I want to highlight a couple of the main funds that students may be eligible for and how those can change. To start, we have the Cal Grant, which is a fund offered by the state of California. This award value, so the overall amount that a student is eligible for from year to year, is dependent on the passing and approval of the state budget. It does have specific income and asset ceilings, but providing that a family is under those ceilings each year, their Cal Grant will be renewed at whatever the overall value is determined by the state of California. So we certainly hope, and we do a lot of hard work lobbying the state to keep the values at least steady, if not increased, for private institutions, because our calculation is a little bit different than what the state and UC schools get for the Cal Grant. But every year that is dependent on the state budget passing and what is determined there. The federal Pell Grant, now this award value is very specifically tied to the EFC, or the expected family contribution. The figure that the FAFSA kind of spits out at the end after reviewing all of your household information. There are maximums and minimums that are set by Congress each year. And then I do want to say that the Pell Grant specifically is very sensitive to the expected family contribution. So if the EFC increases from one year to the next, you would see a decrease in the Pell Grant award, or vice versa. If the EFC decreases, you potentially could see a Pell Grant increase. We have seen the Pell Grant Award consistently go up over the last couple of years. Certainly we hope for the same in the future. And I know that there are many national organizations that lobby on behalf of students to increase that Pell Grant Award, recognizing that college costs certainly can go up from year to year. The UOP grant, that is determined at the time of admission, and we certainly do our best to preserve that baseline value from year to year based on a family's overall financial need. Typically, it takes some drastic increases in family income for the UOP grant to decrease, but certainly that's something we review on an individual basis each year when the FAFSA is filed. Now, if your student is planning on utilizing or tapping into any of the undergraduate loans that they are offered, there are limits each year, and those amounts actually do increase a little bit as a student progresses through college. So as a second year student, it increases from $5,500 in the federal loan program up to $6,500. A dependent junior or senior can borrow up to $7,500. And if you take a look at the column on the right for independent students, they can borrow $9,500 as a first year, and that increases then up to $10,500 as a second year and $12,500 as a third or fourth year student. We recently had a webinar on student loans, and we go into more details about the student loan program. So if you are interested in knowing more, you could definitely go back and view any of those webinars at another time if you would like to. These are always recorded, so if you have to leave early for some reason, you can always go back and view later. Certainly, we know that there are things that come up year to year, and we're seeing that play out now with the coronavirus pandemic. The financial aid appeal process is not something that's just available to brand new first year students, but if your family sees major changes to your income as your student progresses through school, we certainly would encourage you to contact our office. Such as a job loss, or if you've had a reduction in hours, or if you've had major unusual expenses, such as unreimbursed medical bills that you have paid. If any of these things come up, please do let us know. We would be happy to walk you through the steps of the special circumstance appeal process and what documentation we might need to collect so we can review your student's award. Especially because we know that the FAFSA always looks at income from 2 years prior, and very often there can be changes in a span of 2 years. So please don't hesitate to contact us if anything comes up. We're happy to review that possibility for you. All right, so we have reached the end of the Keeping Your Financial Aid presentation. So we are happy to go through and address any questions that you may have at this time. So if you could go through and type those into the Q&A box, we would love to answer any of those questions for you.
Okay, we've got one question already. And they apologized if they missed it, but is the Cal Grant available to all students even though family may live out of state?
Oh, definitely a good question. So unfortunately, as an out-of-state, if the student has graduated from an out-of-state high school, for example, then unfortunately they would not be eligible for the Cal Grant in the state of California. I think part of the rationale behind that decision is that there are taxpayer dollars that go to support that program that are paid by California residents. So with that being said, it's money that is for California students going to California colleges. So yeah, I know that one that's a little bit unfortunate at times, but that is one of the main tenets of the program, is the student does if they're coming in as a brand new first year student, they need to have graduated from a California high school. So I hope that answers your question.
Our folks are thinking today. Another question about summer school. Is there financial aid for summer school, and how much does it cost to go to school in summer?
That's a great question. So there are summer school sessions that are offered for all of our continuing students. The way that summer is viewed here at Pacific, and this can be handled differently depending on what school the student is attending, we view summer as the start of our brand new academic year. So if your student will be attending summer school next summer, the summer of 2021, if I'm getting that time frame right, your student does need to file the 21-22 FAFSA. And if they are taking at least 6 units, we can go through and review for any of their federal loan eligibility, keeping in mind that if they choose to borrow their federal loans, that does take away from the loans they have remaining for the upcoming year. If your student is Pell Grant eligible, we can review for any additional Pell Grant eligibility that can be extra aid for the summer. But very typically there is no institutional aid. So for example, the UOP grant or any institutional merit scholarships that are available for summer, typically because summer is offered at a much reduced tuition price in comparison to the regular academic year. I know right now for this summer, it is about $800 per unit. So it is around half the price of what the traditional unit cost is over the regular academic year. We have a summer worksheet that is available for students to complete with our office beginning the spring semester for any of their planned summer sessions. So your student can certainly follow up with us in the spring if they're planning on taking summer courses, and we can go over that aid eligibility with them certainly.
Thanks. Moving on to a question about loans. If a student accepted the federal direct Stafford loans for subsidized and unsubsidized and didn't use it, is the student penalized? Does the student have to do anything to reverse the acceptance?
That's a great question. So there are a couple steps to completely finalize the student loan process and to have those loans dispersed, paid to the student's account. So step number 1 is accepting those loans, but there are 2 additional online documents that have to be completed. If this student does not complete these additional loan documents, the funds will never pay to the account, and the student will ultimately not be responsible for paying those loans back if the funds are never dispersed. That includes going through and completing the master promissory note and the loan entrance counseling. Now, if a student does all 3 of those things, and if you as a family decide ultimately that you're not going to need the loan funds and you had planned on borrowing them, or perhaps they even have dispersed, and you have maybe made a payment to the student account to kind of counteract those loans, the student can always work with our office and we can send those loan funds back, ultimately canceling them as if the student had never borrowed them in the first place. So a student can always reduce a loan, or if they have not borrowed the maximum during the year, they can always increase those loans as long as we are within that given academic year. That's a great question.
Okay, and going back to Tiger scholarships, with the additional scholarship opportunities, can they be combined with the Powell scholarship?
You know, that certainly may be a possibility, but I cannot state with any certainty that it would be a guarantee, simply depending on the amount of the family's unmet need, if they have any additional unmet need, if they have any other need-based aid, that certainly kind of all comes into play. I won't bore you with all of those details, but if the student has unmet need, and we certainly can look at that to see if we can add in additional scholarship aid. If you have more specific questions about your student's account and what that might look like, I definitely would encourage you to follow up with us after you have filed your 21-22 FAFSA in October, and we can look at that possibility to see how any additional aid may incorporate into your student's projected or current financial aid award.
Kaitlyn, is a question about outside scholarships. And this is someone who's from an organization who may be asking for perhaps proof of enrollment, or they need to send in a certification form to the financial aid office. Can you tell students how they might take care of that?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can always use our office's contact information. We are the Office of Financial Aid. The main university address is 3601 Pacific Avenue, Stockton, California, 95211. Hopefully Casey can type that into the chat for you. That probably would be helpful. If they need a specific contact name, if perhaps the main Office of Financial Aid address, or the title of that our office, if that's not going to work. Kim Beck is our outside scholarship coordinator, so you could write her name in there if you would like. If that organization does require proof of enrollment, unfortunately, that's not something our office is able to officially certify. That would be requested through our registrar's office. So you can go through and work with our registrar on that. Our phone number here is 209-946-2421.
Kaitlyn, I think students are able to print their enrollment verification as well if the organization only needs proof of where you are enrolled in college.
Yes, absolutely. You do need to wait until you registered for courses because that does indicate that you are in fact enrolled and taking courses. But yes, you can access that once you go through and register during any of the summer online orientations.
Okay, I did go ahead and add our address and Kim Beck's contact information in the chat if you needed that. And then the next question, how does your financial aid change if you switch to off-campus housing?
Yeah, great question. So typically what happens when you move, I think in this instance, maybe what you're referring to, if you are a traditional first-year student and you have gone through and lived in the dorms the first 2 years and maybe junior or senior year as it aligns with our housing office's policies. Typically, there's a couple things students need to meet before they are approved to live off campus. But if they're meeting that criteria and maybe junior or senior year, they want to get an off-campus apartment or rent a house with some friends, that's typically the scenario we see. What that does is that does increase your overall cost of attendance. With that being said, doesn't typically have any impact on your general financial aid award, but it would allow the student or the family perhaps to borrow additional loan funds to kind of cover that difference. But the major thing that you'll see is that you'll no longer be charged for any of the on-campus housing. So depending on where you live, you certainly could see some savings there at the point that a student elects to live off campus. So hopefully that answers that question. If you want to discuss that a little bit more, or if that isn't quite your student scenario, I would definitely recommend reaching out to a member of our counseling team individually. Either give us a call or send us an email and we can look into that a little bit further for you.
This next question might be the same if it needs some individual attention. It's a student asking about Cal Grant. If I'm attending UOP in the fall with more than 40 credits, does it mean that I might not get my Cal Grant for my 4th year since I'm coming in with sophomore status? So the unknown here, if this is a brand new freshman or a transfer student.
Yes, exactly, Suzanne, because those two scenarios are treated a little bit differently. If you are coming in as a brand new first-year student, maybe you attended one of the dual high school or middle college type high schools where you kind of concurrently take high school curriculum and college curriculum. In that instance, you are essentially certified as a brand new first year student with those 4 years of eligibility. If you are a transfer student, meaning you came from a community college or perhaps another 4-year or a private institution, and you have a transfer entitlement Cal Grant, what happens in the rules with the Cal Grant program, we do need to certify what your entry level status is. So if you are coming in as a sophomore, that would mean you have kind of the corresponding levels of the Cal Grant. It's not an immediate 4 extra years, if that makes sense. So if you're coming in as a junior transfer student, we would go through and certify your Cal Grant for 2 years, for example. A sophomore would have 3 years. So hopefully that helps to clarify things. And we certainly can look at that additionally with you and perhaps check with our Cal Grant coordinator on that if we need to.
Okay, next question. After the student signs the promissory note, how do they move on to the next counseling step?
Yes, the loan entrance counseling is also at the same studentaid.gov website under the complete aid process tab. They will see the master promissory note there, and they also can then complete and click on to complete the loan entrance counseling. So all at studentaid.gov.
Next question is about financial aid and maybe financial aid eligibility. How many units may students take each semester?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as it pertains to what the student is charged, a student can take anywhere between 12 and 18 units per semester to be considered, one, a full-time student and to receive their full-time aid eligibility, but they're also charged that same set price. If a student ends up taking more than 18 units per term, I don't always advise this because that's certainly a lot of units to take in a given semester. But any more than 18 units, they're charged an overload fee. So for the 19th unit and beyond, if a student takes less than 12 units, they may be considered either a 3/4 time student or a half-time student. They're charged accordingly based on that structure, but then also financial aid is revised accordingly. If they're only intending on registering as half-time or 3/4 time, typically your aid reflects that. You get half of your aid eligibility or perhaps 75% of your aid eligibility in that given term. All right. What other questions might be coming through? I do see one that came in. The person asked, can you take the $3,500 subsidized loan and not the full $5,500? Absolutely. Within any given academic year, you can decide exactly how much you would like to borrow in each loan. So for example, if you've been offered the $3,500 subsidized loan and the $2,000 unsubsidized loan, you can accept just the subsidized portion. You can leave the unsubsidized loan in an offered status. If you need a portion of the unsubsidized loan, you can do that as well. You really have a lot of flexibility in going through and accepting how much you would like to borrow up to the maximum in a given academic year. When the student logs in to Inside Pacific, they can then go through and actually type in the exact dollar amount of which fund they'd like to borrow.
Okay, we had a few more questions pop up. If I'm using GI Bill benefits, what does that look like for financial aid?
Yes, great question. So very often, dependent on what type of benefits and what chapter those benefits fall under, that is something that we essentially are blind to. You're able to kind of combine both options. If you have not reached out already to our veteran certifying official in our registrar's office, her name is Natalie Kirsch. I'm sure that Casey can go through and pop her email in the chat there because she goes through the certifying process with students of getting those benefits activated. Like I said, very typically, A majority of veterans benefits don't really have any bearing on financial aid. If a student is getting full benefits, full tuition, for example, through the vocational rehab program, we may have to go through and make some revisions there. But for a majority of the GI Bill funds, it doesn't impact the award one way or the other. It's just an extra resource that you have available.
Next, Kaitlyn, is probably better answered by our student business services, but I think you can go over some general things about when is the first payment due? How will we be billed? How does the payment plan method work?
Yeah, that is a great question. I know just enough about that to be dangerous on that topic. So very typically, if your student has gone through and registered for courses, because that is what triggers the billing process. If your student's not registered for anything, there's nothing that the university can bill them for. So with that being said, I do know that a majority of our students attend or are planning on attending the June orientation. So if they register at that orientation, they then, that'll trigger the billing process that our student accounts team goes through. Payment for the fall, either payment in full for the entire fall semester, or if you have signed up for either the 3-month or the 5-month payment plans, your first payment or your total payment, depending on what you chose, will be due August 1st. If you signed up for one of the monthly payment plans, you then will have monthly payments the first of every month. The payment plan certainly can change. So for example, if a student is perhaps billed for their books later on, if they bought books on the bookstore and charged them to their student account, or if there's a course that a student signs up for a little bit later and there's a course fee that's associated with that class, that could be added on to the student's bill later or after billing has occurred. In that instance, the payment plan certainly could go up or down, just depending on what those circumstances are. If you have more questions about the payment plan options, how to enroll in the payment plan, how to have your student add the parent as an authorized user, I would definitely recommend you check out the student accounts section of the Pacific webpage. If you just go to the main A to Z directory at the top of the page, you can then scroll to student accounts, and they have all of the payment plan and billing information on their section of the site. There is a CashNet billing portal that the student has access to. Like I said, they can add parents as authorized users, and parents would be able to log into that portal as well. But there is a main billing portal that our student accounts team utilizes for all of our students.
Okay, we have another question that you might not be able to answer. Do you anticipate the financial aid offer to change by the start of the school year because of the extenuating circumstances, assuming they're referring to the COVID pandemic?
Yes, I am interpreting that question that way as well, Casey. So at this time, we are not planning on making changes to awards or tuition amounts, but I do know that if there are any major changes that our leadership teams make, certainly we will be in touch with our families as soon as possible. The plan is certainly to be on campus in the fall if we're able to. And so with that being said, we certainly hope for business as usual, but if there are any changes at all, we absolutely will reach out to all of our admitted and confirmed students to let them know at that time.
And probably another one that might be for student accounts, student business services. How much is the down payment for the 10 payment plan?
So if you elect for the 10-month payment plan, essentially what would happen is your remaining balance for the academic year, or likely, let's maybe just speak in terms of the fall semester. So whatever your fall balance is, that would be divided up over the 5 payments. I do know at the time of the first payment, you essentially are paying 1/5 of the remaining balance, plus the $75 enrollment fee. If you choose the 5-month payment plan per term, there is a $75 fee that is assessed at the time you make your first payment. So you probably have to do a little bit of math there to get to those calculations. But I'm certain that our student accounts team would be more than happy to help you kind of get closer to what those figures look like. We do a good job of estimating that, but they are the final word on what that amount is.
Okay, we've got a very common question that we hear a lot. What's the difference between the direct unsubsidized and subsidized loan?
So the unsubsidized loan, it is not subsidized by the federal government, meaning that it will be accruing interest while the student is in school. Keep in mind, the student's not required to make any payments on either the unsubsidized or the subsidized loans. But the unsubsidized loan, it does accrue interest. The subsidized loan, or sometimes what I like to tell students to help them remember, which is the better loan. It starts with an S, so I say it's the super loan. The subsidized loan will not accrue any interest while your student is in school. It does start to accrue interest when loan repayment begins, which for many of our students is 6 months after graduation. So it gives them some time to get settled, find a job. Then they can go through and start making payments on any of the federal loans that they borrowed. We are projecting, or at least what has been projected for interest rates for the federal direct subsidized and unsubsidized loans for undergraduate students will be at 2.75% for next year. I certainly know that paying back loans with interest can be a concern for many families, but honestly, these are historically low interest rates that we have not seen probably for years. At least in the 6 years that I've been in financial aid, I have not seen interest rates this low. I know certainly that's due to everything that's going on with the economy, which has impacted so many families, negatively. But students are seeing a decrease in loan interest rates across the board for all different kinds of loans for next year. So yeah, we're projecting that to be signed at 2.75%. If that changes, we will get that information on our website as well. All right, we've got about 10 minutes left for this webinar. So if we certainly will be here for the next couple minutes to see if any additional questions come through. So please feel free to go through and type those in the Q&A there. Don't make us sit here awkwardly in silence. This is your opportunity to get your questions answered. While I'm waiting to see if any of these have come through for everyone that is still here. Once the webinar ends, you will be directed to go through and fill out a quick survey. I'm asking if you wouldn't mind to please go through and do that. That really will help inform us how we can go through and perhaps make changes to this series for next year, or what we can do to improve. We have been super happy that we've had this opportunity to be able to host these. We do certainly hope that they have been helpful. As always, you can always go back and review the prior recordings. This is our last webinar of the Financial Aid Friday series. I know that we're looking into the future about what additional topics we could host webinars on. So if you have any ideas, something you want to learn more about, please do not hesitate to let us know, and we would love to start working on building content for you all. Or perhaps if there's a different time for us to be able to offer them, we may have some flexibility to do that. Yeah, any feedback you have is certainly appreciated. All right, looks like we did have a question that came in. Does the financial aid office need documentation of outside scholarships? Yes, we do. They are considered outside resources or additional financial resources as described by the Department of Education. So yes, legally we are required to collect that documentation. If at times a student forgets to let us know, 99% of the time, we are notified because those checks do come usually directly to the institution. But, you know, in advance, please do let us know and we can go through and get those recorded, let you know if there's going to be any changes to aid. Very often that's not the case. But yes, please definitely do let us know. A student can record those through Inside Pacific, or if they want to email us with those names of scholarships and the amounts, we can get those recorded and then be on the lookout for those checks when they do come in.
Kaitlyn, there's another question that came through and perhaps we need this, the attendee may need to follow up with us directly. Where can I find the Cal Grant authorization form that needs to be signed?
Okay, so if you have been awarded the Cal Grant B, there is an authorization form that has to be signed and submitted to our cashier's office. It does not come back to our office. I believe you can click on the link through Inside Pacific, but if you are having some trouble locating that, we can go through and email that form out to you. I believe we may also have it linked on our section of the website, but I know we've done some recent website revisions and that could be missing. So if you are having some trouble locating that, please certainly do send us an email. We can attach that and then you can forward it on to our cashier's office after you've completed it.
Okay, we have an off-topic question, but it's still a great question. Does the school offer students health insurance?
So students are required to have some form of health insurance coverage, either their own individual plan, maybe a plan offered by the state, for example, or coverage under a parent's plan. If they do have their own plan, over the summer, they will need to complete the health insurance waiver. If that current plan, as determined by the university, you know, does not provide proper coverage in our local area, for example, then the student will be required to purchase the school's health insurance plan. There is a set charge per semester. I don't quite know how much it's going to be for this upcoming academic year. Over the past couple of years, it has ranged anywhere between $1,200 and $1,600 per semester or so.
Next question is about outside scholarships. If an outside scholarship is paid directly to the student, do they need to record it on Inside Pacific?
Yes, they do, because once again, that is considered a financial resource as kind of set by the Department of Education, something that we do need to know about. So yes, if it is intended for, you know, their educational costs, you know, tuition and fees, books and supplies, any of the educational costs built into our cost of attendance, then yes, that does need to be reported. All right, we have got about 5 minutes left here, so this is the final all call for questions. If there is anything else you would like us to answer at this time, we are happy to do so. So please go ahead and get those typed in there before 1:30, so we can let you all go. We're certainly conscious of your time as well. It does look like we had a question that came through back to health insurance. Where is the waiver form located? I don't believe the waiver for the 2021 school year is online quite just yet. It does go online over the summer. I cannot recall the date off the top of my head, but if you go through in the search bar of the Maine Pacific website, if you type in insurance office, that will take you to the website where the waiver and the portal that you submit the waiver is very typically located. And if you do have any questions about the health insurance process, what kind of coverage is acceptable, what kind of coverage may not work, depending on where you're located and what type of health insurance you or your student may have, please do not hesitate to reach out to our health insurance office. They would be happy to go through and answer any of those questions for you. right. Any other last minute questions? We have a few more minutes for our webinar today. Okay, I don't think we have anything else coming in. So with that being said, I do want to thank all of you for attending today, especially for those of you that may have tuned in every week. We certainly do appreciate your time, and we are happy that you have chosen Pacific. We're here to support you in any way that we can. One last minute question that came in. Actually, we have a couple more, so we'll go ahead and address those pretty quickly here. On the master promissory note form, it says that the reference needs to be a different address. So on the master promissory note, it does ask for the student to list 2 references. So two people who the Department of Education can go through and contact if they're having trouble getting a hold of the student for any reason. One of those references definitely can be a parent at the same address the student lives at, but the student does need to list a second reference at a different address than where the student is residing. So it can literally be anyone, another family member, a friend. This is not someone who's obligated to pay back any kind of loans. It would just be a contact that the Department of Education would reach out to if they are having trouble getting a hold of the student. So hopefully that answers that question. And then I think this will be our final question today. The person asked, the business service would be the area that has more information about the billing process, correct? Yes, student business services, otherwise known as our student accounts team, they would be happy to go over more details about the billing options that you have, how to enroll in the billing process. They would be the folks to reach out to. So yeah, they'd be happy to help you out on that. Once again, thank you all so much for joining us today. We hope that you have a great rest of your Friday and a great weekend.